Very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, let me thank the organizers and the hosts for inviting me to moderate this particular session. It is indeed a very important concern at this point in time, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Uh, and in fact, this is the opportune moment to discuss this. Now, in fact, in the very last session, I was intently listening to Professor Laha, and when he was talking about complex data sets. Now, interestingly, when we use the term complexity in the context of systems thinking, it has a different connotation altogether. It's not only about the complex data sets. We are faced with complexity in every endeavor of our life. And in fact, the complexity is unfolding itself in various ways. In fact, the world is unfolding itself. And we are right now faced with complex problems, which in fact, political scientist Tooze calls polycrisis. Various forms of crisis, various forms of challenges have essentially intervened and intersected at one point in time. We are having supply chain issues, we are having a war, we are having tariffs, we are now having, of course, the challenges of climate change and global warming. And right now, in fact, as we get into a host of trade agreements, we have been talking also in terms of the challenges faced with the world of tariffs. Now, in the last few years, if it has taught us anything, it is that geopolitics has a way, not only geopolitics and in fact associated geoeconomics has a way of reshaping the issues we once thought belonged to completely different domains. And climate policy is definitely one of them. And what once sat largely within environmental negotiations has now moved firmly in the realm of trade policy, in the realm of industrial strategy and global competitiveness. And that has made the entire problem not merely a complex problem, it's a wicked problem. And why I call it complex problem is precisely because of the fact that complex problems do not have solutions. It is not a simple problem. It is not even a complicated problem which can be disaggregated, which can essentially be placed as an aggregation of a host of simple problems. Simple problems can be expressed, in fact, in terms of the framework of the ordinate and the abscissa. Can be expressed, in fact, in linear or nonlinear forms. Complex problems cannot be expressed, in fact, in any form of functional form, and that is what we are facing at this point in time. And the clearest shift that we find, in fact, at this point in time is with the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism, and where India itself and other developing nations will become privy to. We have already signed the EU-India Free Trade Agreement. Now the issue is, or the concern is, whether we are going to nullify the impact of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which actually manifests itself as some form of a tax, some form of a tariff, with this EU-India Free Trade Agreement. Now the EU describes the CBAM, or the carbon border adjustment mechanism, as if it's putting a fair price on the carbon embedded in its imports, with a larger goal that it is enforcing a cleaner environment. It is also enforcing just transition. Now the big question comes here, and this is a normative question. Is this really going to ensure just transition? Let's face this. Any commodity, suppose going from Bangladesh, Latin America, South Asia, India, or suppose UAE, Southeast Asia, has a certain amount of carbon content in it. The virtual carbon exports or the virtual carbon import as far as European Union is concerned. And eventually that carbon footprint is going to entail a certain percentage of tariff, which they are pricing, in fact, as per their market mechanism. Now, given this, that is going to increase the entire cost of the product. So virtually this stands as a tariff. We are already, in fact, having a large landmass of the global north, that is the United States of America, in fact, imposing tariff on large part across the world. And eventually the developing nation is already exposed to that. We find another tariff being imposed by another landmass known as the European Union, which is again part of the global north, and which is supposed to pay for just transition, which is supposed to pay for the energy transition of the global south, because they are the ones who had the fun at our cost. They have grown at our cost, and we are essentially the victims of their fun. So Is this fair? Is this just? But again, Brussels, the European Union, is extremely careful of not calling it a tariff. But for exporters and in the developing countries, exporters and the importers, in fact, out there as well, they are going to face this particular cost. And now that cost might be passed on to the consumers, and in any case, that is going to render our exports uncompetitive as compared to those who have already adopted cleaner production and cleaner procurement and cleaner mechanism of distribution. So, is the CBAM going to negate the entire advantage that we are going to have from the EU-India Free Trade Agreement? Is this fair? Who finances this? And what will be the role of data, analytics, finance, and policy in making this transition possible? So, if carbon efficiency is becoming a condition of market access, how would Indian industries, or suppose industries of the global south, going to react to this exogenous force that has been imposed on them? So with that, these are of course the broad questions that come to my mind when in fact I talk about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. But let me now turn to the panel, because we have a stellar panel in fact which is going to discuss all these issues, apart from in fact talking about the very competitiveness and how we are going to prepare for this despite the EU-India Free Trade Agreement. Now, what I'll request the panelists who have already been, and you already know their credentials, to essentially confine their initial interventions to 5 to 7 minutes. After that, we can have the second round, and after that, we can open this to the floor, so that we can at least end this session maybe with at organizers by 2 p.m. because I don't want to be an impediment between lunch and the students. So let me first come to Professor Deepankar Sinha. Professor Sinha, these are the broad questions that I'd like to pose to the panel, but I won't like to have a very specific question at this point in time to you unless you intervene with the initial interventions.
Thank you so much for giving the brief and to the point introduction to the subject matter. In my opinion, any international business is all about the total landed cost. If at one end EU-India Free Trade Agreement has reduced the duties and tariffs, and the other end there is a margin on the tariff barrier on due to carbon emission. Of course, carbon emission is limited to few industries like aluminium, steel, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, and not all industries. So there is in this industry the cost is going to go up. But at the end of the day, if the sum total cost of the duties, taxes, and the carbon tax, India becomes competitive, or in that sense, any country becomes competitive, then they become the source of that particular product. Now, whether carbon tax is justified or they could have taken tax in some other form, that's not. If that question comes up, it's true that climate is really has undergone a change. In a day-to-day life, we see how climatic changes have taken place. So something has to be done. Now there are two ways to do it. One way is that we control it voluntarily, that we try to remove all non-green components in our business, or we try to restrict it because of compulsions arising out of regulatory reforms and so on. Now, well, when this thing starts, there is always a discrimination between the countries. There is a divide, the carbon divide, I can call it, like the digital divide. The carbon divide which makes one country stronger than the other. The one which has already adopted this mechanism should stand more competitive price-wise. Of course, if not, the EU trade agreement has led to lowering of duties and which may reduce the total landed cost. If not that, then it makes things more competitive, less competitive because of the tax factor. In fact, carbon tax has been also getting levied on the shipment of certain tonnage and above. So we can also look for such shipping activities, provided such ships are ready to come here, because we are primarily the feeder ports in the country and which runs on traditional fuel. Even if it goes for green fuel, are we having the facilities for bunkering and replacing, refueling those ships? If so, then we think to what extent and how much time will we take to come up to the level that our competitors have done. That is what I would like to say from my end. Thank you.
Just a follow-up question to this. The issue right now is, of course, we think these are very important concerns that you raised. But the concern is that, is this just transition? Given the fact that we cannot actually transform our entire production process tomorrow. We have a net zero target by 2070. We are supposed to think about, we also have our own NDCs and other forms of targets. Now, it is an external agency, that to the global north, which is supposed to help us, in fact, in this entire process of just transition by financing, better mitigation projects, energy transition projects. Rather, it is not that they are putting across, they are financing us, rather they are extracting from us. It is tantamount to that. So, given this, maybe in fact you can respond to this in the very second round, that given this, do you really feel that this is appropriate and this is in line, this is in consonance with the very principle of just transition which European Union itself has espoused? So maybe in fact you can come to this in the very second round. But let me come to Tridibesh. Tridibesh, since you have been working in this entire space of from forest, farm to food security, food and nutritional security. Given this, what is going to be the impact on this entire value chain, and how will the value chain essentially absorb this exogenous force or exogenous shock? And what will be the mitigation mechanisms by way of which we can make the farm sector a bit more competitive? We can really create a much more robust, viable, and I would say resilient supply chain as far as from farm to fork is concerned.
Okay, thank you. I think what do you call, most of the audience is a student. So I don't know how many of you really understand this CBAM, which is Cross-Border Adjustment Mechanism. This is primarily triggered by the European Union, that they want their intra-Europe benchmark of clean manufacturing to be aligned to imports also. So primarily what has happened is that a lot of European companies, because Europe has started putting stringent environment and carbon mechanism standards, they have outsourced or created manufacturing outside Europe so that they can run there in a much more relaxed overall regulation and bring back those products. So then the EU actually aroused to the fact that we cannot let that happen. Even imports have to be aligned to our own clean and green standards. So that's why this entire thing has started. As of now, as Professor Sinha has mentioned, it doesn't cover all type of commodities. It has started becoming in force from 2026. It covers steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizers and things like that. But the thing is, it will extend to other products surely in years to come. Now, basically, what can these companies do? I think, basically, if we keep the question aside that whether it is just or not, that's a different thing to be handled. But if we assume that that is something our Indian exporters of these commodities have to adhere to. So what do these companies do? There are a few areas to look at in terms of making transition to what you call renewable sources. That's one. Second is looking at, I would say, using biomass or things like that, convert it into gas or fueling their boilers or other heating equipment so that their dependence on fossil fuel goes down. And of course, there is an issue of significant improvement in the material science so that they start using cleaner and greener materials in their process. Now, what we do as a company, we primarily work in the farming, forestry, and food value chain. This is what we call voluntary carbon credit, whereas what we are talking here is called compliance carbon market. As of now, CBAM doesn't treat this voluntary carbon credit as something that can be offset with the compliance load that comes. But just to give an example as an use case, currently we are talking to two companies in India who are into export, one steel and the other cement. They understand that voluntary carbon offset doesn't lead towards reducing their carbon footprint load, but they are actively looking at what we call carbon projects in areas like food and forestry so that that can finance their expenditure or the investments which are required to make the compliance related transition in the overall supply chain. Now, there are some overlaps there, things like what we call biochar, which essentially is conversion of agri waste or farm waste into concentrated carbon, and that can be put back into the soil, as was being mentioned by Dr. Nilanjan, that how do we make the agriculture process more, I would say, sustainable, less carbon loaded. So biochar is one which can help significantly in terms of soil amendments to make the farming and the food produced from there much more sustainable and cleaner. But biochar as a process can also generate syngas, as we call it, which can be used back in the boiler, and that can basically reduce the percentage of fossil fuel that has been used for heating the boiler. So these overlaps are slowly emerging. So even the companies which are now facing compliance issues in terms of CBAM, and they are basically loaded with tariff, or you can say in indirect carbon tariff, they are looking to use areas like farming and forestry as a tool to basically finance their investment, which they will have to do for the compliance purpose, and basically reduce this carbon tariff which is now being imposed on them. So I think I will stop here right now. We can come back on further questions.
Thank you. I think extremely valuable intervention, Tridibesh, and uh, I presume that definitely that's solution oriented. So thanks for that. Ajeya, may I have your initial interventions, and after that we can come to our targeted question.
Okay. You want me to get into this just transition or is it broader?
Whichever, rather my question to you would have been in fact from the perspective of finance, given that in the background IFC and also the way in fact you have dealt with climate finance so far. See, heavy industries such as steel and aluminium, they will take large scale capital investment to decarbonize, no doubt about that. Now, from a very development finance perspective, and our emerging economies really mobilizing the scale of investment required for this kind of industrial decarbonization. And who is going to pay for that? That's the big question right now. So given that we already have a climate financing gap, which is to the tune of 1.5 trillion US dollar annually.
Okay. Thanks, Nilanjan. So basically, we'll try to put this into the perspective of CBAM, and the two things I think very important for us to know at this point of time so far as CBAM is concerned, and then I will come to the question of the financing. So what is the scale of the problem for country like India or even Asia today from the CBAM perspective? Now, as Tridibesh mentioned, that in the CBAM, in the first phase, they are only covering the 5 set of commodities: iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizer, cement, and power, which excludes the green hydrogen, which has a potential to be exported from India going forward. Now, so far as if we look at the sector, For India, there is 23.4 to 24% of our total iron and steel exports land up in European Union. And if you look at the overall export basket, 4 to 5% of our export represents the iron and steel export outside India. So, if you look at all the 5 sectors, basically the iron and steel and to some extent aluminum are the 2 sectors which are of high importance from the perspective of getting affected by the regulation like CBAM. Now the question is, what is to be done for this sector? Now, one part is the decarbonization, which is of the paramount importance, that in order to achieve carbon efficiency, these sectors, whether it is iron and steel or aluminium, these are the so-called hard to abate sector, in a sense that it's not very easy by some of the available means to reduce the greenhouse gas emission from this sector. You need the harder interventions, more capital intensive interventions there. Number two, so they have essentially 3 things which are available at this point of time. Number one is the change in the overall process technologies. Number two, the energy transition, which is probably happening at a broader environment, and the industries will also get benefited from that. Number 3, which is very important and I think very relevant from the context of today's conference, is the data transition. Because the CBAM or this European Union, the overall mechanism, the carbon tariff mechanism, is talking about the submission by the importer or whoever is importing from European Union, from these countries, the verifiable data of the carbon emission. And this verifiable data means that for a complex facility, they need to adopt the digitally driven, the MRV, monitoring, reportable, and the verifiable system for collection, monitoring, and the reporting of the greenhouse gas emission data. And this is not only just restricted to the plant. So one part is that, the reporting of the carbon emission. The second part is the smart energy management system, which is today most of the cases is AI enabled or the analytics driven. Now, these are some of the interventions which, over and above highly capital intensive items, give straight away 5 to 6% of the reductions. And time of these are the so-called low-hanging fruits at this point of time. Even if you consider the certain capital investment of the digitization, but still these are some of the interventions that the company can make even with their internal accrual, especially for the larger iron and steel companies who are essentially exporting to outside. For typically MSMEs, this might be a problem in the short to medium term, which essentially can be resolved with some of the financial mechanism. Now, the other thing on the data side, which will also be very important, is the supplier data management, and which is very, very critical for addressing problem like CBAM, because the importers essentially would not only require data from a particular plant, but would require this data to be gathered on a real-time basis from the whole set of suppliers. So the supplier data management and how to bring the whole supplier network into this data management, data reporting system is once again very, very crucial. Coming to the question of finance, I think at this point of time, if we focus only on these 2 sectors, because given the current situation in the CBAM, the other sectors from India are not very relevant. Okay, going forward, if CBAM becomes intermerged with the European Union Emission Trading Scheme, which is also slated to expire from 2035 onwards, then possibly many of the sectors will come under the CBAM. But at this point of time, this is mostly iron and steel and the aluminium sector. Now, as I mentioned, that most of the big industries, the way they are trying to address this problem of finance is to develop a transition path. So, in a transition path, the industries essentially identify the items which are so-called low-hanging fruits, which can be financed with the help of the available finance from the domestic institutions or through their internal debt equity arrangement. There are some of the items which are highly capital intensive, which requires new technology adoption and so on and so forth. Now this is where the problem comes, and it again doesn't have a very easy solution. So one aspect is the concessional financing, which is also very limited at this point of time, because to be very frank, this large volume of concessional financing actually flows from a lot of developed countries in the form of the overseas development assistance, which is coming under pressure given the current geopolitics, post-COVID, the debt crisis which have mounted on a lot of the developed economies. So this has essentially come down. So we need to find kind of a hybrid structure where little volume of this concessional finance can lead to the greater mobilization of the commercial finance. And these are some of the structures which are evolving, the very interesting structure from the perspective of International Finance Corporation, World Bank Group. We are working very closely to multiply the private capital mobilization with the certain injection of the public capital or the blended finance. Last but not the least, it's very important in order to have a smoother transition to come out with a de-risking tools, and that is where I think the global north can play a very important role. Coming up with a good quality of the insurance funds, the good quality of the long-term patient capital, the various form of guarantee mechanism which the financial institutions in the developed world has in place in various forms and shape. And these are some of the instruments which can basically de-risk the initial investment risks which many of the larger promoters in the developing countries need to take to decarbonize their industries. So I will stop here. I think there are the lots to be discussed, but then come back with the...
Thank you, Ajeya. I think very vital point, especially the point on private capital. I presume that maybe in fact in some way or the other, you'd also like to bring in the role of philanthropy out here and how to mobilize philanthropic capital. Now, one very important component when it comes to climate finance, possibly I'd also like you to intervene in the very second round, is essentially how do we create perceptible ROI for private capital to get into this entire climate financing game. And I presume that this is, of course, more prevalent in the context of adaptation finance than mitigation finance, but it will be great if you can also reflect on that. But let me come to you, Professor Choudhury, maybe for your initial interventions, and then we can get into more focused interventions in the very second round.
On which area?
You can, would you like to reflect on just transition domain?
So, see, the technology is like a running train, and they are always improving. So, energy efficiency is continuously improving, and we are chasing this. Now, the focus is that how can we make it carbon neutral, and as you know that the necessity is the mother of invention. So, the human innovation power is very infinite. So whatever we want, we are able to do. Now in Europe, there are 3 companies in Sweden. They have been able to produce steel at 100% zero carbon emission process. That is, they are replacing carbon with hydrogen. And that hydrogen, they are produced from renewable source. So in the entire supply chain of manufacturing that steel, there is zero emission of carbon, but it is not yet commercially viable. Now, with the technological advancement, so putting this here, because they have achieved something, and as it has been rightly said, that this achievement has come not out of sky, so it is because of the long-term trading which has been since industry revolution. So, it is we have the right share of that achievement. So in a way, India has always put before WTO that this type of sudden intervention of CBAM is illegal, and I think India is the 3rd highest objectioning country. 29 times India has put objection in WTO, followed by Russia and China that CBAM is illegal. because it is not playing the equal role. It is not. It is ignoring the history. Now, anyway, that is the other side of it. But if we come to the our side, so we can do a lot of just transition. From students' perspective, I can see that you have the huge power and energy to mobilize things like Indian in an Indian way, like the use of biomass, as Sarah was telling. It is possible to utilize biomass and oxygen-enriched combustion system to completely change the zero emission. We can have our own way of generating or producing steel without any carbon emission to the environment. So when we think of right now what is the international price we are checking, and we are seeing that in European market the international price of steel is about $900 per ton crude steel, TCS they say. And the difference, we are at present, we are about 30% more carbon intensive than European steel. So that way we have to pay about say $50 per per ton of steel, as that difference of emission will be converted to something adjustment. So $50 out of 900 is more than 5%. So it is a considerable amount as far as the net to net trade is concerned. So even if we are able to manage for today, what about tomorrow when they may be approaching 100% zero carbon steel? So then we shall have to compete another level. So that is why I think it is right time for us to switch over to renewable, to switch over to as much as possible like biomass, I was telling, biochar, then briquetting. We can produce the, because in blast furnace they are using the coke. So we can produce biocoke from the biochar. In a process, biocoke can be produced, which can completely replace the coal, the coke that is presently used in the blast furnace. So there is, and you know that in India we have more than 300 million tons of biomass surplus as waste, or whatever you, nothing is waste in a true sense, everything is a waste, but it is not being utilized now. So if there is a technological development that and a proper startups, as we see now, India is revolutionizing in the point of startups. There are so many in the startups in India that they are making lot of impact. So this biomass to biochar and to the biocoke, that will enhance the employability and the business scenario of the economy of India. So it is a what Europe is trying to do is to rectify their economy to make it more carbon free or more sustainable in terms of emission, and what we have a much larger potential to do so. As we know that the government has now in West Bengal, you know, that rooftop solar, earlier it was 5 kilowatt, can be adjusted, maximum 5 kilowatt can go for through net metering. Now it has been enhanced to 500 kilowatt. So imagine that the huge amount of potential each SMEs who are supplying, and what will be the effect? That large industries, they are producing steel and they are getting supply chain. If you see, there are huge number of SMEs who are supporting them. So they will be affected through this mechanism. Now if they go for renewables, they go for rooftop solar, they go for biomass systems, so they will become more and more less, rather more and more carbon efficient or less intensive in a sense, and that will indirectly, that will help the overall Indian energy intensity or carbon intensity to be reduced and produce the more cleaner steel. So we do not mind. It is a, I would say that it is a curse in disguise that sape bor hoyeche banglaয় boli আমরা. So from other point of view, we must fight at the global level that it is injustice, but from our perspective point of view, এটা আমরা ভেবে নিতে পারি that this is a way that we can take it as a challenge and we can do much better than what they ask for. We can produce even better steel than they are producing. Not only what we have seen that power, fertilizer, cement, and all these whatever they call, we can make better if we have that confidence. Then you are the force, you know that how to do it. There are technologies, you take initiative and you develop the softwares, you develop the different packages which will give the correct data, which will collect the correct data and feed the SMEs to go ahead with the available resources, because it is the facilities and what are the resources available. So there is no one answer to the complex solution. We have multiple answers for multiple locations, and there will be your involvement. You have to come up, the students, the young generation, you have to come up in a big way to make the change happen. So this is what.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate this ivory tower optimism. Uh, in any case. In any case, that's of course going to be the long run solution. But the issue is that whether we can implement all this in the very short run. But what we also need to appreciate at this point in time is that CBAM is only going to get imposed on 0.2% of the GDP, and not more than that. So in any case, we are not essentially an export-driven economy. We are largely a consumption-driven economy. We have our own robust mechanism of ensuring growth. So the issue is essentially sectoral. So that is something that we have to keep in mind. But at the same time, since you raised about the WTO, I also would like to come to the professor from Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, given the fact that you have been advocate, IIFT, of course, you have the Center for WTO Studies, you have been doing a host of things about the WTO, advocating the importance of WTO. How relevant is the WTO?
In fact, all global bodies like United Nations, WTO, have been taking back seat for quite some time because of various reasons, and one primary reason is about the funding to run these bodies and the signatories honoring their own declarations that they have made across different WTO conventions. Now, in that sense, whether it is necessary or whether it can play a role, that debate continues. But what I think is that it should be there, at least if not resolutions come up, but there is a place formally where the protest can be launched, and maybe the protest grows up in a way that there is a natural correction that takes place, if not under the intervention of WTO.
We need to have a more diversified market as far as the exports are concerned. Can we really fit in to the ASEAN value chain, ASEAN regional value chain, as far as our MSMEs are concerned, which are getting, especially in the iron and steel domain, which are getting in fact largely penalized unnecessarily through this CBAM mechanism. Tridibesh, given your example, your experience, not merely in the farm sector, but your overall experience, how would you like to reflect on this?
Yeah, I think possibly CBAM is a starting point. It will not end there. So India will also be having its own what you call compliance carbon protocol, which is coming expected either end of this year or next year. So that will create a structure which all companies have to follow. It is not only the exporters to the EU. And also I think CBAM like also regulations will come in the markets of Canada, and frankly speaking, I don't think ASEAN will be any more relaxed, because I think Singapore is really looking at a very, very carbon conscious market. Even China has increased its intensity of becoming more, I would say, carbon neutral over the last 5 years. So I think globally there is no escape from, I would say, decarbonizing yourself, whether it's a CBAM or not. But of course, time is a factor. It will possibly, the companies have to look at what you call means of financing themselves. But I think it's a slowly and steadily reversible process which we are getting into. And we are talking of CBAM, but there is also one more thing which is coming up at the back of it, in the same EU is called something called EUDR, okay, which will impact agri-commodities, where they will not allow any product to be imported into EU which have a deforestation footprint before 2020. So it is not that it is only iron and cement and manufactured steel which are coming under CBAM, but if you look at EU, it is rubber, tea, lot of such agri commodities which are coming into it. So in some way or the other, through some regulation of the or the other, things will start impacting the other sectors as well.
Yeah, this is a good that you raised this question of deforestation, because round about, in fact, in the month of September, I was in the European Union and discussing all about the EU-India FTA.
Carbon, less carbon, like that. Is it that how can industries be encouraged or regulated to go for less carbon intensive technology? Is it like that? Yeah. So there are certain things happening. One is that CCTS, Carbon Credit Trading Scheme. Earlier we had PAT, Perform, Achieve and Trade. So the government of India has they have introduced the Energy Conservation Act, and according to that, energy audit and implementation is mandatory for the designated consumers, and so that is for the larger industries. But now what is happening, that is about 1000 industries, 1200 industries who are designated consumers. But now it is happening that for CCTS we will have a bigger role to play, because now carbon credit trading scheme will not only encourage the energy efficiency, but also it will encourage the carbon footprint. So that will be through the supply chain, that is SMEs from where they are procuring, and then the renewable energy application. So that way it will have multiple benefits. So we are hopeful that it will have lot of impact. CCTS has just been introduced, and entire supply chain, like all the SMEs, there is another regulation that 1000 top capital intensive companies, they have been asked to publish their BRS, or business responsible sustainable reporting. So that is again will be adding, so it is creating lot of job opportunities, because the companies, they are trying to hire people who can help them prepare that report. So these reports again require lot of data.
Somebody asked that, what a company basically needs to meet the CBAM regulation. So again, I mean, coming to the fact that CBAM is one of such international regulation which is forcing companies to actually look at their carbon footprint, their carbon exposure overall from their operations. And though at this point of time, the impact is mostly limited to sector like iron and steel and aluminium, but maybe going forward, the way the overall the environmental regulatory situations play out in the different parts.
Slowly, we will try to increase our efficiency, reduce our carbon consumption, and then we can also trade if we can build in some other project to neutralize this impact. Thank you.
Thank you. So we come to the end of this panel discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have time, so you can ask the questions later to the panelists during lunch. That's all for you. I mean, the panelists are also going to be there for you. So in any case, what this panel actually points out is that there is a challenge, and with the challenge comes an opportunity. And in any case, what Professor Sinha also pointed out, indeed, in fact, when we use the term just transition, the very concern of time frame essentially emerges. So just means you have to give a time essentially to take this transition to take place, and that is more important. So the larger takeaway from this conversation is that we cannot really frame this entire discourse in the context of climate versus development kind of a framing. The challenge now is to ensure that the transition toward lower carbon production is both technologically feasible and economically fair, particularly for developing nations that are still industrializing, like that of India. But at the same time, the discussion also points to an opportunity that if carbon accounting, digital traceability, cleaner production technologies become part of this entire transition process, this could help position industries for a world where carbon efficiency increasingly determines access to the global markets. And there is no doubt about that. And we need one very important component for that, that is the mullah, the finance. And in any case, who is going to offer this finance? It's not only going to be a very top-down approach in terms of financing the projects and a top-down approach in terms of imposing the conditions. Probably a more fairer world will emerge as the global south rises, and the global south is rising. There is no doubt about that. So thank you for all the questions, and thank you for your patient or impatient listening for as far as this session is concerned. And thanks to the organizers for bearing with this panel as well and bearing with me.